Mohammad Javad Zarif is here. He has been Foreign Minister of Iran since 2013. From 2002 to 2007, Zarif served as his country's ambassador to the United Nations. I am pleased to have you back.
Good to be back, Charlie.
You met with Secretary Kerry. Give us a status report.
We're now almost ready to go for a long-term agreement that will ensure that Iran's program will always remain peaceful. From our perspective, that's not much because we never had any other intentions. And at the same time, it will provide the possibility for Iran to engage with the West in a more normal fashion. I'm not saying the international community, because yesterday I spoke to the NPT conference on behalf of a significant portion.
The Non-Proliferation Treaty Conference.
The Non-Proliferation Treaty Conference. I was the first person to speak in that conference as a representative of 120 member states of this international community.
And Iran is a signatory.
Iran is a signatory and a chairman of the non-aligned movement, which brings together 120 countries. So, and all of them have views very similar to Iran about nuclear non-proliferation. We believe that we should rid the world of nuclear arms. We believe that nobody should own nuclear weapons. Certainly non-proliferation is an important step to reach that objective. We certainly do not want even more people owning these very dangerous weapons.
Why should the United States believe you, or the P5+1 countries believe you?
Well, it is a problem of mutual mistrust.
Yes.
Compounded mutual mistrust. And we don't expect anybody to believe the other side, as we do not, at this stage, have the possibility of simply putting our confidence and trust in the words of the United States or other members of P5+1, certainly not the Western members of P5+1. There is a history of problems, grievances on the part of the Iranian people going back to the time they overthrew our democratically elected government, all the way to the recent times. And I assume that the United States and some of the Western countries have created reasons for themselves not to trust us. We don't believe that those are founded. So what we need to do is to have a serious program, a serious agreement that would enable every side to build this trust. But the important thing is that this process should build confidence, not destroy confidence. Unfortunately, what we see, the rhetoric that is coming out of Washington, particularly the debate that is going on in Washington, is not conducive to building trust.
You mean the assertion of the Congress that they have a role here?
No, I mean, I don't interfere in the internal affairs of the United States. That's for the American government to decide. And for us, as a foreign government, all foreign governments deal with the other foreign government as an entity. We don't look into the domestic politics, because that makes international life impossible. If you wanted to decide how to deal with Congress, how to deal with the judiciary, how to deal with the executive branch of every government, it would make it impossible. So we deal with the government of the United States, but we want to hear statements and rhetoric from Washington that helps to build confidence rather than destroy confidence. This is not... Yes, go ahead.
Let's talk about confidence. And number one, we all noticed that when you returned after the agreement, the framework agreement had been signed, you were given a hero's welcome. You rode through cheering crowds in an open-air car. Unusual for a secretary, a foreign minister, I would assume. What was that about? Was it there is on the part of the rank-and-file average Iranian citizen, somehow they want to rejoin the world, and they want to stop this conflict with the United States and this calling of the United States the great Satan and all that?
Well, the Iranian people are rational people. They are people who resist pressure, resist intimidation. I think I said on this show some time ago that Iranians are allergic to pressure. Whenever there is pressure, the Iranians react, and react strongly. And you've seen what the pressure over the last 8 years has brought the international community, or at least the 8 years where the pressure was the primary tactic of dealing with Iran. maybe from 200 centrifuges when we last spoke here on this show to 20,000 centrifuges now. So what is important is that the Iranian people did not like that. They were prepared to go and to resist that, but didn't like it. That was not our preference. Our preference was for dialogue. And because the Iranian people witnessed that their representatives were being dealt with through a process of negotiations based on mutual respect, they were happy. But I can tell you that the same people will resist if they see that the agreement is not respectful of their rights, respectful of their dignity. They will certainly prefer to withstand pressure rather than accept a bad agreement.
There is a considerable belief in America that sanctions brought you to the negotiating table. That's the reason you're there.
Well, I think they're wrong. What brought us to the negotiating table is the belief that this government has, and this was the platform that was chosen by the Iranian people. There were 6 candidates. Some were much better than the current candidate in dealing with the economic problems. But they chose a candidate who believed in respect and engagement. That is why we are at the negotiating table. The proposals that we have, the possibilities and options that we present are exactly the same options that we presented to the international community 8 years ago or 10 years ago, and they failed to recognize the significance of those proposals at that time. And they then lived to regret that missed opportunity. Now they have another opportunity. They should understand that this is not because of sanctions. This is because of a choice that we have made to engage. If that doesn't succeed, then we have other avenues open.
Everyone believes, or many people believe, that the supreme leader, had for a long time a negative opinion, to say it graciously, of the United States, and believes that the United States, and in fact has benefited from his rhetoric. At the same time, the U.S. president has reached out and sent letters to the supreme leader.
Which he replied to.
The
point is, the Iranian public is not just the supreme leader. The Iranian public, the general public, are very skeptical of U.S. intentions. This is unfortunate, but a reality. The reality is that the Iranian general public in Iran are very mindful of history, very much so. They remember the United States overthrowing a government, supporting a repressive regime.
And as you know, the United States remembers the taking of American hostages.
Yes,
they both have a historical memory.
There is a bad history. There is a public psyche in the two countries that have led to an atmosphere of mistrust. And we do not want to debate what happened first, who is responsible for this. We have been talking. I have been reporting. Unfortunately, over the past 18 months, the United States can look at Iran and say, over the last 18 months, Iran complied with all the obligations.
They have essentially said that.
They have said that. Unfortunately, on our side, the United States has entangled itself in such a web of sanctions against Iran that even if it wanted to, it would have been difficult for it to get out of it. And sometimes we saw that some overzealous politicians had more insistence on keeping sanctions and on removing sanctions that they had agreed to remove.
You will acknowledge that sanctions have done terrible damage to your economy.
Of course they have.
You can't sell your oil. You can't do one thing after another.
But sanctions, you must remember, if sanctions were designed to hurt the Iranian people, if sanctions were
to change the mind of the Iranian government, not hurt the Iranian people.
Well, they didn't. The sanctions didn't change the mind of the Iranian government. The Iranian government actually went ahead with building more centrifuges. So what the sanctions did was to create an atmosphere among the Iranian population that the United States doesn't want to treat them well, that the United States is trying to put pressure on them, that the United States is trying to prevent them from even buying medicine with their own money from abroad. You know that, I mean, the United States is saying that Iran can purchase medicine, but if you go to a bank and you tell them that I want to send medicine to Iran, they say, I can't open an account for you.
No one doubts that these have been very successful sanctions.
This is not what I call success.
It is. It's a success if, in fact, you want to feel the pressure of a series of governments around the world trying to influence the government to come to the table and talk about the nuclear issue, because they don't want to see you, even though you say you don't want one, have a nuclear capability.
No, you see, my friend.
Yes.
The point is, if you wanted to antagonize the Iranian people, I mean, not you, if the United States government wanted to antagonize the Iranian people, if the United States government wanted to create feelings and misgivings about the United States among the general Iranian population, then the sanctions have succeeded. But if the intention of these sanctions were to bring Iran to the negotiating table, that's not what they achieved.
How can you say that?
No, because
you're at the negotiating
we
table.
are at the negotiating table because people like us were at the negotiating table even before this election. My predecessors were negotiating. We were always at the negotiating table. We were at the negotiating table during the Khatami administration in Iran. President Rouhani and myself were negotiating. Then our successors continued to negotiate. It is now the United States which has abandoned that idea of zero enrichment. If the United States accepted that Iran had the right to enrich 10 years ago, we wouldn't have had all of this nonsense for the last 10 years. So if you want to insist...
The U.S. now sees that as long as there are caps on uranium enrichment, it's okay.
I mean, that would have been possible 10 years ago, too. There were proposals on the table 10 years ago, before a single United Nations sanctions was put in place, that would have provided even a better option. But the United States decided to torpedo. The Bush administration, John Bolton, decided to torpedo the agreement that was being reached with the Europeans at that time, and now they live to regret it. And now they understand that sanctions do not produce results.
Okay, let me talk about sanctions.
That negotiations produce results.
The United States has said that the sanctions should be phased out on the basis of good conduct and respect for the agreement. Supreme Leader and you, certainly the Supreme Leader said this publicly, we have to have the elimination of all sanctions at the time this agreement, final agreement, is signed. All sanctions gone.
Well, we are talking about economic and financial sanctions, and what we agreed, the parameters of the agreement that we reached in Lausanne are very clear. That once we start implementing the first steps, and the first steps are very clear, about the number of centrifuges in Natanz, the number of centrifuges in Fordow, the stockpile, what will happen to the redesign and rebuilding of a heavy water reactor in Iraq. These are all parameters of the sanctions, of this agreement. All sanctions, all economic and financial sanctions must go. That is, all the UN sanctions, all the EU sanctions.
The U.S. says phased, and you say based on good conduct, and you say at the beginning.
Well,
that's what the Supreme Leader says before we sign the agreement.
Not before we sign the agreement.
At the time we sign the agreement.
No. Sanctions must be lifted as soon as Iran implements its agreed part. We have an agreement. That agreement provides for the lifting of all sanctions, all economic and financial sanctions. And those sanctions are lifted because the logic is very clear. The logic is, if you want an agreement, you have two options. Option of pressure, option of agreement. You cannot mix the two. If we have an agreement, that agreement must be based on this logic, very clear logic, that you cannot have two opposing tracks running at the same time. You either have
the building up of sanctions, or what do you mean? What are the two opposing tracks?
The two opposing tracks, one is to have an agreement. The other one is to impose pressure. Imposition of pressure has its counterparts. The counterpart to imposition of pressure would be Iran building more centrifuges.
Is there a way around this so that, for example, someone suggested to me today, that if the agreement is signed, there'll be some date certain in the future, at which time the two parties will have had an opportunity to see how they handle this. And at that time, perhaps they could get to that and had a chance to examine inspections and see if they were as everybody hoped they would be on the side of the P5+1, and you cooperated with that the AIEA had an opportunity to do the kinds of things that they have insisted they be able to do. And by the November 15th or some date in the future certain, you would have a chance to evaluate whether the United States was prepared and living by the terms of the deal, and they would have a chance, all the countries involved, to see if you had lived by the terms of the deal. Is that the way you're going to work out of this?
Not really.
Have you thought about that idea?
No. We have had plenty of time to see how we can do this. We will have, hopefully, an agreement by June 30th. If we have an agreement by June 30th, it would set a procedure in motion. That procedure will start with Iran taking some preparatory measures and the United States and EU taking some preparatory measures, all of them endorsed beforehand by the Security Council in a resolution that will be binding on everybody, including the United States. The United States is a permanent member of the Security Council, but nevertheless, all decisions of the Security Council, whether Congress likes it or not, are binding upon the United States like any other member of the international community. So there will be a resolution of the Security Council, will set the terms of this agreement, and the two sides will start implementing this agreement simultaneously. We will take measures, the United States will take measures. It's not a trial and error period where you will test us and we will test you. We have had opportunity to test each other for the last many years. We have had the opportunity to test in an agreement that we signed in November 2013 for about 18 months. So now is the time to put in place very concrete measures. The concrete measures that Iran will put in place are very clear. We will reduce the number of our centrifuges for a period of time. We will reduce our stockpile of enriched uranium for a period of time.
But what's the period of time?
That's the period of time that we have discussed and negotiated, mostly 10 years.
Right.
And then the sanctions will be lifted. Not after that period of time, at the beginning of that period of time. That's a very clear understanding.
It's not a clear understanding in terms of how Americans of significance,
well,
and they don't say that. They don't think that you can eliminate all the sanctions at the beginning and then follow through.
But you cannot have the cake and eat it too. You have to make a decision, as we have to make a decision. The decision has to be whether you want to have an agreement or whether you want to continue the path of pressure and resistance on the part of Iran. These two are mutually exclusive. And we have all agreed that this heavy water reactor will be redesigned. It will remain as a heavy water reactor, but it will not produce plutonium that would be capable of building a nuclear weapon. We never wanted this to build nuclear weapons. This is a medical isotope research reactor. It will do the same job.
When you say you never wanted to build a nuclear weapon, even though the decision, everybody agrees, has not been made, you do want the capacity, if you make a decision to build nuclear weapons, to be accessible as if you had nuclear weapons.
You see, my problem, my friend, is that people in the United States see nuclear weapons as a panacea. Nuclear weapons have not brought anybody any security. We are more rational. We have a deep history. We've been around for millennia, for several millennia. So when we look at history
that Americans respect.
And I think they should look at our history. In the past 250 years, we have not invaded any country. We're content with our size, with our population.
But you have, you haven't invaded any country. Now, no country here comes to these kinds of conversations without having some involvement around the world of varying degrees. But you have, people that you support are engaged in warfare in other countries.
My friend, who did we support?
Hezbollah.
No, my friend.
Hezbollah is engaged in Syria, as you know.
You cannot
Iranians are supporting
you cannot
military action in Yemen right now.
My friend.
Am I wrong about that?
You're wrong about where you start your history. Can we say the United States supported the Taliban, Saddam Hussein of Iraq?
Yes.
But, I mean, so
they supported
a lot of
Saddam Hussein in his war against Iran, of which Iranians have not forgotten.
We will not forget.
Exactly.
We will not
forget.
Because
it was a brutal war against Iranians.
We will certainly not forget the fact that our people, civilians, were targeted with chemical weapons, and nobody raised an eyebrow about it. These are parts of history that we will not forget.
You shouldn't.
And we shouldn't forget. And the United States shouldn't forget the fact that it supported the wrong people in our part of the world and continues to support.
Okay.
We always resisted extremism in our region. We resisted. We're the only country that is standing up against this group of this bunch of terrorists.
Which terrorists?
Daesh, Islamic,
the only group. We just saw you're the only group that stood against Daesh.
Who is doing it other than Iran and Iraq and the people of Syria? Unfortunately,
may I make a small suggestion there?
Yes, please do.
In Iraq, when Iraqi militia supported by Iran, and Iran advises on the front line, according to an interview I did with the Iraqi Prime Minister last week.
Sure.
Iraq advises on the front line. Americans and people part of the coalition were engaged in airstrikes with the same objective, the retaking of Tikrit.
Well,
is that true or not?
It's a bit late.
Well, but is that true?
No,
is it true?
It's a bit late. It's a bit too late. For 4 years, because of geopolitical considerations, unfortunately, in our region, against Syria, against Iran, a group has developed, has been nourished, has been armed. 1,000 people every month are infiltrating through some of our neighbors' borders into Iraq and Syria, coming from 82 countries to join this very dangerous extremist group to kill the Syrian people.
Essentially Sunni.
Well, it's not the issue of Sunni Shia.
I know, but it's essentially Sunni.
It's the issue, and they've killed more Sunnis. Can you remember the Jordanian pilot who was burned alive?
Yes.
Was he a Shia? He was a Sunni.
Yes.
Most victims of this group are Sunni.
Well, that was
Muslims.
because he'd been a pilot, too.
No. Most
and
victims.
Down.
No, this is not a sectarian issue.
It isn't part of a sectarian issue.
No.
Is it not at all? There is no. Are you saying to me, that
people want to give it? People want to give it.
I'm not.
No. People want to give it a sectarian flavor, Charlie, and it's very, very dangerous if you give this a sectarian flavor. Maybe some people will see very short-sighted benefits in giving that a sectarian flavor, but you've got to be clear. That this is an enemy of everybody.
Okay.
Daesh is an enemy of Saudi Arabia as much as it is an enemy of Iran and
should
Iraq.
the United States and Iran be working together to defeat Daesh?
Well, we are certainly...
That's an easy question.
We are certainly working to defeat Daesh, to the extent that the governments in the region, Iraq and Syria, ask us to be involved. We believe that this is a regional issue and a global issue. It is a regional issue first and a global issue later. There should be international cooperation. It's not the United States and Iran. The world is not composed of only United States and Iran. A lot of other countries in the region. We are engaged in this fight in a very serious way. And we believe that everybody needs to be engaged against Daesh.
Including the United States.
Well,
and this happens to be a case, the threat of ISIL, Daesh, is a very high priority threat on the part of the United States.
Well, I'm happy to see that it is becoming one.
Yeah.
I'm happy to see that it's becoming one. But before it invaded, before it started its operation against Iraq, it wasn't the case because people were tolerating it when it was attacking the Syrian government. That's unfortunate. But you got to remember, history started some time ago. It didn't start today. It didn't start with Daesh moving into Iraq and occupying Mosul.